This is a Global National Special Report. The Queen Mother, a fond farewell. Here is Kevin Newman.
And a very good morning to you all. A very early morning on the West Coast, well before dawn if you are with us this morning, and with the sun rising on the East Coast, and we'll chase it across the country this morning as we bid a fond farewell to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. This is going to be a morning to remember, I think, for many of us. For those of you with a very deep attachment to the monarchy, this will be a morning to remember that attachment, to remember history, and to celebrate one of the world's most enduring legacies. Let's go to London this morning, where it is a sunny day there, about 12 degrees Celsius, and you can see the beginnings of the procession to St. James, which will be the starting place for the procession. The procession, just for a little bit of background as we begin this morning, is the movement of the Queen Mother's coffin from where it has been in the last few days, and you can see the gun carriage there. That is the ceremonial carriage that will carry her coffin from St. James to Westminster Hall, and that is only about a kilometre long, that voyage. It takes only about 20 minutes, 28 minutes actually, but it will be a degree of pomp and circumstance through the streets of London that city has not seen since 1952, which was the passing of King George VI, of course, the husband of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Well, for those of us with perhaps only a passing interest in the monarchy, this is going to be an interesting morning to learn a little bit more about history and to better understand the British traditions that Canada was partly founded on. Surely to be a morning to remember. And as we watch the carriage approach St. James, I want to admit, as we begin this morning, we'll be with you for about an hour and a half. My own limitations, those of my generation as well, probably, that have known the family largely as a source of storybook romance, or in some cases the scandal in the papers. I have done my best to read and learn over these past few days, and in fact years, having covered several royal tours myself, but I am by no means an expert, so we have invited a couple of them in this morning to help guide us through this morning of tradition, of pomp and circumstance, as I said, and of course of history. Some of the traditions we're going to witness today are many, many years old, in some cases up to 1,000 years old. So I'd like to introduce the two gentlemen who will be with us this morning, helping guide us through it. They are standing by in the newsroom of the National Post this morning. John Geiger, on your left, a reporter from the National Post who wrote a really interesting, or helped to edit as well, a fascinating supplement on the life of the Queen Mother that appeared in the National Post last weekend. And on the right of the screen, it is Raphael Hadel-Mancu. He is with the Monarchist League of Canada, and I want to welcome you both. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning. John, you were mentioning just before we get underway here that you had an opportunity to meet the Queen Mother at one point in your travels as a reporter. What were your impressions?
Well, I just found her a very elegant, highly intelligent woman. It was in Edmonton during a royal visit, I believe it was 1985. Her flight had been delayed because of an electrical storm. She ended up being diverted to CFB Coal Lake, where she enjoyed tea with the servicemen there, then flew into Edmonton, and there was a reception at the Westin Hotel, which I attended. I found her lovely, very engaging, and I think everyone in the room was sort of swept away by her charisma.
Raphael, give us a sense, and this is an impossible task, I suppose, but for those of us who are not as familiar as we should be with her place in history, give us a sense of who we are saying farewell to today and over the next few days up until the funeral on Tuesday.
We're saying goodbye in a certain sense to the 20th century. I think the Queen Mother epitomized the 20th century. Her life was the span of that century, and through that, at the span of our collective memories. And so I think very much so we are mourning, in a certain sense, the end of an era. Somebody who I think was a constant in an era full of dramatic and ever-changing situations in the current world. We could draw hope and comfort from the knowledge that the Queen Mother was there always, and that, I think, that stability was something which we need in an era as we are in today.
All right, let's go back to London for a moment. Keep you gentlemen with us as we will for the next hour and a half, and take a look at the gun carriage as it rounds the corner on the streets of London there, heading towards St. James Palace, being led, as you see, by a guard of honor. Raphael, give us a sense. This gun carriage is as everything will be as we progress this morning, has a story of its own. They've been working, and I understand, polishing it up for a good number of days now.
Yes, this is being pulled, as you'll see. The gun carriage and the horses belong to the King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery. The Royal Horse Artillery are responsible for the gun salutes fired on royal occasions such as this, and anniversaries and remembrance days and so forth, and they're also in charge of ceremonial and state funerals. It's quite fitting, I think, that they are the ones in charge of today's ceremonies, in large part because King George VI was responsible for ensuring that they had this ceremonial role. In 1939, the last portion of the Royal Horse Artillery was mechanized, but King George VI expressly stated that the artillery was to maintain a ceremonial aspect, and upon inspecting the troops, he gave permission for the regiment to be called the King's Troop, and the current Queen has permitted the regiment to continue using that, and so it's very fitting that King George VI's spouse should be carried to her final resting place and to her lying in state by this regiment.
So many of the regiments that we're seeing now and that we're about to see as the morning unfolds have a connection to the Queen Mother's life and her history as well. John, how involved was the Queen Mother while she was living in what we're about to see, and in deciding precisely the order of events and how her passing was to be honored?
Well, she, of course, approved all of the events we're about to see unfold. This was part of a plan that was approved by Her late Majesty, and of course the inclusion of various regimental representation from Canada. We'll be seeing the Canadian Forces Medical Services represented, the Toronto Scottish Regiment, the Black Watch, Royal Highland Regiment of Canada. These are Canadian regiments for which Her Majesty had a special link historically, and they will all be participating in the service or the procession that we're about to witness.
Raphael, some traditions are going to be set in this as well. Traditionally, I gather it is just the male members of the royal family that are part of the procession, but Princess Anne, the Princess Royale, I gather, will be given a place of honor as well.
Yes, the Princess Royal will be breaking with tradition on this occasion and will be walking in the procession. It's believed that the Princess Royal received the permission of the Queen Mother. The Queen Mother, as John was saying, was very much involved in the planning of this funeral. The funeral had been planned for a long time, and in fact many of those involved in the planning have since retired, so long has Her Majesty lived. But it is believed that the Princess Royal received permission from the Queen Mother to break with tradition in this interesting way.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to break away from the live coverage just for a moment here. For those of our viewers who are not as up as they would like to be at this point of the Queen Mother's role in history and importance to Canada as well, Sean Mallon, one of our Global National reporters, has put together this story, which will background you and perhaps put the events that you're about to see in better context.
The Queen Mother's life traversed the 20th century, and her public duties marked key moments in the history of Canada. Hugh Stewart commanded one of her Canadian regiments.
She loved Canada, and she said so many times. She said, "I love Canada," from the first time George and I came here.
Quebec has seen and has been conquered by the democratic graciousness of their king and queen.
It was a sensation, the first visit by a British monarch, all the more dramatic because the arrival of the Queen and King George VI came in 1939, only months before the outbreak of World War II. Here she invented the Royal Walkabout, plunging into a crowd of veterans to shake hands.
Veterans and public alike break through military and police lines. They rushed forward to greet their sovereigns personally as fellow citizens.
In Toronto, the royal couple attended what was then called the King's Plate, a horse race she would attend often in her 11 visits to Canada. With the arrival of the war, she took on the role of inspirational leader.
The Queen passed along the ranks of the battalion, stopping to chat with the men and winning all hearts with her charm and grace.
The royal family made a statement by remaining in London throughout the Nazi bombing, even when Buckingham Palace itself was hit. When her husband died, she was only 51, Some thought she might withdraw from public life, but instead she kept up her engagements.
She looked every inch a queen, and she fulfilled the ancient role of a queen, which is to be accessible while being remote.
Even as her children and grandchildren became fodder for tabloid gossip, the Queen Mother's popularity only grew. She might have a taste for an occasional gin and tonic, but her admirers saw her as a surrogate grandmother. Bud Baker often hosted her at the Queen's plate.
She was a very, very warm person. She just enlightened your heart whenever you were in her presence.
She was everything that a queen, in my opinion, should be.
Her last visit to Canada was 1989, an historic anniversary.
When I came to Canada with the King, just before the start of World War II, I never dreamed that some 50 years later I would arrive once more in Ottawa.
She was unique, and both her style and her dedication and her longevity will not quickly be either replaced or equaled.
Returning now live to London, where we are preparing to see the pallbearers who will accompany the Queen Mother's coffin. Quick note on terminology here. We are guided by the British Broadcasting Corporation in many of the words and terms that we are using here this morning, and it is their guidance that you do refer, in fact, to the Queen Mother's coffin as that, and not a casket, but as a coffin. You can see Buckingham Palace there in the foreground. Bright sunny day in London, about 15 degrees. Welcome back into our discussion. Rafael Hayden-Mancoux from the Monarchist League of Canada and John Geiger from the National Post. And gentlemen, it looks as if we're preparing here for a gun salute. There was a 41 gun salute a couple of days ago to the Queen Mother. The only time that had been done previously was, I gather, at the death of King George VI.
Yes, this will be a 28-minute gun salute today, 1 minute for one gun salute for each minute of the procession, which is a bit different to that of the state funeral of Sir Winston Churchill, the last great funeral we've known in 1965, and that was a 90-minute gun salute, one for each minute of the former Prime Minister's life. That, of course, was a longer procession, so they were able to fire guns for a longer time.
And Rafael, this is a great degree of pomp and circumstance, but this is not a state funeral, is it?
No, this is a royal ceremonial funeral. Protocol dictates that state funerals are to be accorded only to the sovereign and in exceptional circumstances to other notable Britons. In history, we've had state funerals for Admiral Viscount Nelson, the Duke of Wellington, Prime Minister Gladstone, and Winston Churchill. It's not really traditional to give the consort to the sovereign as a state funeral, and indeed the Queen Mother wouldn't have expected one.
Having said that, Kevin, I would jump in and add that for Canadians who witnessed the funeral of late Prime Minister Trudeau, that this is certainly a degree of pomp and ceremonial that would suggest a state funeral to many Canadians who are used to simpler affairs.
Well, I guess, gentlemen, the other reference...
Indeed.
Sorry, go ahead, Rafael.
Yeah, the only real difference, I should say, between a state funeral and a royal ceremonial funeral that the viewers will be able to note is that the gun carriage in a state funeral is borne by sailors, whereas in a royal ceremonial funeral, the gun carriage is borne by horses. This tradition was set in 1901 with the state funeral of Queen Victoria, where the horses which were pulling the gun carriage reared up, breaking the harness, and therefore sailors were immediately put into action to carry the gun carriage. And from then on, the tradition was set, and also state funerals come under the mandate of the Earl Marshal of England, who's responsible for all grand state occasions, and we will not see the Earl Marshal involved in today's procession.
All right, you're looking at a picture here of the Queen's Chapel at St. James Palace, and outside, awaiting the coffin, is of course the gun carriage that Rafael was speaking with, the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery at the at the foot of that. This is Marlborough Road that you're looking at, perhaps Raphael or John, maybe you can give us a sense of the geography here. This is only a very short procession, but it is going through some of the most historic routes in London.
Yeah, indeed. St James's Palace, if viewers look to the left of their screen, they'll see a balcony of sorts, and it's from that balcony that the herald will proclaim the accession of the new sovereign. This is the very first spot that a new sovereign is always acclaimed from. St James's Palace is where ambassadors are accredited to. So this is a very historic Tudor palace, and the procession will be proceeding along Marlborough Road before turning left along the Mall, that great procession route that leads from Trafalgar Square to Buckingham Palace, and then of course through Horse Guards Parade, site of so many great pageants and ceremonial spectacles. From there, of course, along Whitehall, that most famous of streets in Britain, before finally entering Parliament Square, and then to Westminster Hall, one of the most important buildings in Europe.
Westminster Hall, one of the oldest sections, if not the oldest, of the British House of Commons. As we were talking about reference points and how this is probably the greatest degree of formality that the streets of London have seen since, I guess, the death of King George VI, or perhaps Winston Churchill's funeral in 1965, which was a state funeral. But as far as a reference point, John, this is actually a larger funeral than many Canadians will remember from the tragic death of Diana, the Princess of Wales, 5 years ago.
Well, certainly in terms of the degree of formality, absolutely it is. The emotion obviously is quite different. I think we all remember those days being sort of swept up in the sort of, I guess, the surprise and the horror at the sudden death of the Princess of Wales. Many people have been remarking upon the differences between the reaction of the public to the death of the Queen Mother. But I think if you're looking at some of the footage we've been watching over the last few moments, you'll have noted the enormous crowds that have turned out today in London. And while there hasn't been the kind of hysteria that was associated with the Princess of Wales' sudden death, I think there's a great love of this woman, and that's apparent in the streets of London today.
And we were watching the royal family go into the Queen's Chapel at St. James's Palace. You saw Charles, the Prince of Wales, and his two sons, the Princes William and Harry. Of course, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, the Earl of Wessex, Prince Edward, and Prince Philip, the Queen's husband as well. And there's some of the crowds that John was speaking about. So beg your pardon, the order of events here will be that the royal family, as you saw, went into the Queen's Chapel there. We are still awaiting the coffin that will move out to the gun carriage that you see before you. And I know from some of my readings that people have been working around the clock to make sure that the spit and polish on every aspect of the carriage is up to standard.
Yes, and right now, as the members of the royal family enter Queen's Chapel, the Dean of Her Majesty's Chapel Royal will soon be conducting prayers for members of the family shortly before starting the procession.
You can hear the salute in the distance as we look down Marlborough Road and Cleveland Row.
These guns are in Green Park, which is right next to Buckingham Palace, and Canadians will find it interesting that this is also the site of a Canadian memorial to those Canadians who travelled to Europe to help fighting in the Second World War, unveiled with the Prime Minister and the Queen. And also, of course, Canada Gates are there, right to the right-hand side of Buckingham Palace, facing it with the coats of arms of the provinces.
And of course, the Queen Mother's role, John, in fortifying Britain during the Second World War, particularly during the London Blitz, is probably how many people will best remember, and perhaps how history will remember her too.
Well, absolutely. That role was pivotal. She was, of course, in the tour of Canada in 1939, was involved in rallying Canadians to that noble cause, and her refusal to leave the palace, the refusal of her to send the children away. There were many people who were advising that the princesses Elizabeth and Margaret Rose be removed from London, removed from Britain, in fact, to Canada even, and you know, her very famous statement that the princesses would not go without her, and she would not leave without the king, and the king would never leave, is remembered, I think, through the years, and will likely always be remembered as illustrating the stalwart nature which she confronted that crisis.
And Rafael, she held to that her entire life. If there was an event that involved veterans of that war, or the survivors of that war, or memories of that war, you could almost, there the Queen Mother standard flying at half-mast, you could almost be sure that the Queen Mother would make every effort to attend.
The Queen Mother had a very special bond with veterans. I heard someone say recently that many veterans would probably have volunteered to take part in the procession, and indeed in pulling the carriage itself. So strong was that connection.
Let's listen in for a moment.
Royal Navy marching detachments.
This is the St. James Palace detachment of the Queen's Guard. St. James Palace on your left here. And then, Rafael or John, correct me if I'm wrong, we are looking toward the Mall, which is where the coffin will begin a very long procession just bordering on St. James Park.
That's right.
In the center of London.
And now I think these are, I can't really see, but I believe these are members of the Queen Mother's royal household who are probably gathering now.
And these would have been the people who would have attended the Queen, and many of them for more than 50 years, as I understand.
Yes, indeed. The various equerries, private secretaries, assistant private secretaries, and so forth. The male members of the household only. And here I think we see the Dean.
The Queen Mother's standard covering her coffin.
The bearer party is made up of 8 members of the Irish Guards. There we have Peter Phillips and Prince William.
The crown that sits atop the coffin is a piece of history in itself. It was not worn by the Queen Mother since 1953, when she wore it at the coronation of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
That's right, and the arches of the crown were removed for the coronation of the Queen. It was made for the Queen Mother specifically in 1937 for the coronation of her husband, and the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond, one of the most famous diamonds in the world, is set into the Maltese cross which surmounts the crown. And the wreath there that we see now is a wreath from Her Majesty the Queen to her beloved mother.
The diamond you mentioned, Raphael, believed to have first surfaced in history in the year 1304.
That's right. I think the Afghanistan people were the first people to earn the diamond before being passed on to the Sikhs, and from there Dalip Singh passed it on to Queen Victoria, Dalip Singh being King Maharaja of the Sikhs. There is Prince William. In front of him, the Prince of Wales. To the Prince of Wales' left, the Duke of Edinburgh. To the Duke of Edinburgh's left, the Princess Royal and the Earl of Wessex.
And of course, seeing the Princes William and Harry there, tremendously evocative of when they followed their mother's coffin through many of these same streets.
And now we just saw the sailors with arms reversed, a reverse salute. We've just seen that being performed for the very first time since 1965. The funeral of Winston Churchill was the last time that there was a reverse salute. The procession is being led by various members commanding the London District, General Redmond Watt, Brigadier Martin Vine, Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Boddington, amongst others. There with the beard we have Prince Michael of Kent, who recently was in Canada on a coast-to-coast tour.
What are we to make, do you think, or is there something to make of the fact that Anne, the Princess Royal, who you see directly behind the coffin of the Queen Mother, not only is she the first female member of the royal family to be in a procession like this, but it is certainly a position of prominence.
Well, I think it shows really the affection that existed between the Princess Royal and the Queen Mother. They were both very, the Princess Royal still is a very forthright woman, resolute, iron will and determination, and it's only fitting, I think, for the Princess Royal to be here, since she is a person who has always appreciated the role of the crown, the role of the monarchy, and the importance of ceremony.
And the power in this particular family, too, John, has been the power of the matriarchy in the last 50 years, whether it was sort of the Queen Mother fortifying her husband, King George VI, who by all accounts was a nervous man and extremely shy. She was the power behind the throne, and of course on the death of King George VI, her daughter, Queen Elizabeth, ascending to the throne, the first queen since Queen Victoria. I mean, this is a household of very powerful and influential women.
Well, absolutely, and of course, the life of the Queen Mother began in the reign of Queen Victoria, another woman, member of the royal family. It's interesting the lengths of the reigns of the reigning queens. The kings' lives seem to be fairly short-lived, and you know, we're now celebrating the Golden Jubilee of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, which is started, of course, on such a sad note, both with the passing of her sister, Princess Margaret, and now the Queen's mother.
That passing just 2 short months ago. Hard to know, I guess, John and Raphael, what kind of impact that had on the Queen Mother, but she was thoroughly determined to attend the funeral, even though at that time she was quite ill with the cough and the pneumonia that apparently ultimately led to her death.
I'm sure it was absolutely devastating for her to lose one of her children. Her health was already in decline, and that surely contributed greatly to her passing, I would think.
The procession is about to get underway. Let's just listen in and watch for a moment.
Side of the coffin we see 5 men standing on either side. These are the 10 pallbearers who were drawn from units associated with the Queen Mother, including 8 colonels of regiments with which she was associated.
The Royal Highland Regiment, the Light Infantry, the King's Regiment, the Queen's Royal, the 1st of the Queen's Dragoon Guards, some of the pallbearers that you see represented here. There are also, we should mention as well, I guess, Rafael and John, that there are 3 Canadian regiments that are in this procession. We may be able to get a shot of them as they go by as well. Regiments that were associated with the Queen Mother as their commander-in-chief.
Yes, that's the Canadian Forces Medical Services, the Toronto Scottish Regiment, and the Black Watch Royal Highland Regiment of Canada. And they are forming part of the procession, and we should get a glimpse of them.
And in August of 2000, the Queen granted the rare honour to the Toronto Scottish Regiment, and from now on they will be called the Toronto Scottish Regiment Queen Mother's Own.
Of course, she held her Scottish roots very close to her heart, didn't she?
She did indeed, and that's one of the reasons that she felt so close to Canada, because of Canada's Scottish heritage. And now, for the last time, Her Majesty the Queen Mother proceeds down the Mall, a route she's taken thousands of times. The sashes which the senior members of the royal family are wearing over their shoulders are from the Order of the Garter.
What is that, Rafael?
The Order of the Garter is the oldest order of chivalry in the world, dating back to the 14th century, and It is the only order in the orders of chivalry under the monarchy which is worn over the left shoulder to the right to signify its rare place, and it's only 24 knights can exist at any one time, and it is the single highest honor that can be accorded to a person.
We just had a glimpse in the second row of members of the royal family of not only Prince Harry and Prince William, but also Viscount Linley and Mr. Peter Phillips, who are great-grandchildren as well of the Queen Mother.
Peter Phillips, Anne's son, and
Viscount Linley is Princess Margaret's son.
Right, exactly. Is it significant at all? You see the Earl of Wessex, Prince Edward, on the very right of the screen there, beside his sister, Princess Anne. He is not in any military uniform, and I assume that is because he has not led a life of military service.
That's right. One has to have been a serving member of the armed forces to wear the uniform.
Looks like there's a note on the wreath that Queen Elizabeth has placed, or had placed rather, on the coffin of her mother. You can see Elizabeth's signature on it. It's a little difficult to read at this point what is on that card. Someone with better eyes than me believes that it says "in loving memory." Buckingham Palace in the background there as they turn down the Mall. The Mall, I beg your pardon.
And the Mall was the great procession route laid down by Edward VII as a suitable avenue leading up to Buckingham Palace for state occasions. It's seen happy times and, as we see here, sad times. And there is a statue of King George VI, arguably one of our greatest constitutional monarchs and loving husband of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, interred now in the chapel, St. George's Chapel at Windsor, where he will soon be joined by the Queen Mother.
In some of the tape that everybody's been watching here in Canada over the last few days, there's a speech that King George VI gave in Ottawa in 1939 in the royal couple's first trip overseas after they ascended to the throne after the abdication crisis, and he is so clearly nervous about giving this speech, and after the speech ends, in which he calls for, defense of freedom as the world was on the verge of war, he turns and returns to his wife, who was on sharing the stage with him, and the relief in his face is obvious, and her support in the look that she gives him is also obvious. They were quite a couple.
Well, it's interesting that Lord Deeds wrote a wonderful piece which we published in the National Post a few days ago, and he argued that in spite of the enormous contribution of the Queen Mother during the Second World War in London, during the Blitz, that really it was the role she played at the time of her husband's accession to the throne that made her and made his reign so successful, that that was her finest hour in Deeds' words, and you really can see the role throughout that tour, 1939, the role that she played. She was such a pivotal figure, such a support to the late king.
These are the bands of the Royal Air Force who have just passed through Horse Guards Arch.
Away from the cameras at this hour as we watch the coffin of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, make its way toward Westminster Hall. Queen Elizabeth and Lord Chamberlain, the gentlemen, members of her staff, are assembling in the hall to receive the coffin when it arrives at that part of the procession. The procession only lasts about 28 minutes. It's only a 1 kilometer walk.
The female members of the royal family will indeed all be in Westminster Hall with the Archbishop of Canterbury, amongst others, and the Lord Great Chamberlain, the Marquis of Cholmondeley, and Lord Chamberlain and Blackrod, and the Speaker of the House of Commons, where they'll be awaiting to receive the coffin. And here we see a nation mourning, coming out to pay last respects to someone who deeply touched all of their lives.
It's estimated that a television audience of around 200 million people is watching the procession at this moment. Somewhat less than watched the funeral of Diana, the Princess of Wales, but that was obviously a very different situation with the shock of her tragic death. The Queen Mother was particularly close to Charles, I understand. Raphael, could you talk to us a little bit about that relationship, and then we're going to listen to his eulogy for his grandmother, which was, I thought, particularly poignant.
Yes, indeed. The Queen Mother really did fill an extremely important part in the Prince of Wales' life, especially after the death of Earl Mountbatten of Burma, Lord Louis Mountbatten, who really was another formative role model for him. The Queen Mother and he shared much in common, a sense of humour, common interests, and she really was a guiding force through much of his life. And so, we must remember that the Queen delayed announcing the death of the Queen Mother until the Prince of Wales had been notified. He was skiing at Closters. There really was a deep bond here, and the Prince of Wales really has been devastated by the loss of his beloved grandmother.
We have tape of the comments he made earlier this week, and I think it might be fitting to sort of run part of that tape now as we watch the coffin of his grandmother pass in the streets of London.
I know what my darling grandmother meant to so many other people. She literally enriched their lives, and she was the original life enhancer. Whether publicly or privately, whoever she was with. And in many ways, I think she'd become an institution in her own right, a presence in the nation, and in other realms and territories beyond these shores. At once indomitable, somehow timeless, able to span the generations, wise, loving, with an utterly irresistible mischievousness of spirit, an immensely strong character, combined with a unique natural grace and an infectious optimism about life itself. Above all, though, she understood the British character, and her heart belonged to this ancient old land and its equally indomitable and humorous inhabitants, whom she served with panache, style, and unswerving dignity for very nearly 80 years. I know too what she meant to the whole of my family, particularly to the Queen, for whom she was always such a stalwart and sensitive support, ever since my grandfather died, when he was only 2.5 years older than I am now. And for me, she meant everything. And I had dreaded this moment, along with, I know, countless others. Somehow, I never thought it would come. She seemed gloriously unstoppable. And ever since I was a child, I adored her. Her houses were always filled with an atmosphere of fun, laughter, and affection. And I learned so much from her of immense value in my life. Apart from anything else, she wrote such sparklingly wonderful letters, and her turn of phrase could be utterly memorable. But above all, she saw the funny side of life, and we laughed till we cried. And oh, how I shall miss those laughs. And the wonderful wisdom born of so much experience and of an innate sensitivity to life. She was, quite simply, the most magical grandmother you could possibly have. And I was utterly devoted to her. Her departure has left an irreplaceable chasm in countless lives. But thank God, we are all the richer for the sheer joy of her presence and everything she stood for.
Here we have the arrival of Her Majesty the Queen, accompanied, I believe, by Lady Sarah Chatto, who is the daughter of Princess Margaret. There is Her Majesty the Queen.
Outside Westminster Hall, preparing for the arrival of the coffin.
Here we see the Queen Mother, the Queen Mother's coffin entering Horse Guards Parade, which is the site every June of the Trooping of the Colour, the annual birthday celebration for the Queen, but quite a different occasion now.
What a marvelously human few comments from Charles, the Prince of Wales. He felt in so many ways his loss and his attachment for his grandmother, and I'm wondering if you know, the fact that he spoke for the royal family and has been largely the only one to speak on behalf of the royal family signals, do you think, John, another kind of passing here, and that is perhaps we will see in months and years to come, he fulfill a much more public role as the spokesperson for the royal family, a role that is currently held primarily by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth.
I think you're right. I think that gradually we will be seeing Charles playing an ever more important role, of course, as heir to the throne. He already plays a crucial role. And it's interesting that this a similar statement was made by Prince Charles after the death of Princess Margaret, and I think it was you know, a fascinating opportunity for people to see hear His Royal Highness speaking very close to the heart about people he loved dearly. This is something new for the royal family. They haven't done this traditionally, and it likely is a response to the public outcry after the death of the Princess of Wales, where there was a longing for a member of the royal family to speak directly to the people, and we now see this happening almost as a matter of routine on these occasions.
Now passing through Horse Guards Arch. I was touched by the Prince of Wales's comments. They almost seem to be off the cuff, and it really does go to show the warmth that does exist in the royal family, which on occasion perhaps they've had difficulty expressing in public, but it was always present. Here we have now the 4 younger members of the royal family, and here the Duke of Gloucester, Duke of Kent, Prince Michael of Kent.
Members also of the Queen Mother's immediate family as well, her direct family, Simon Bowes Lyon, the Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn, Lord Glamis, the Honourable Albemarle Bowes Lyon.
Yes, the 18th Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn, as well as his son, Lord Glamis, are there, and two of the Queen Mother's nephews, Mr. Simon Bowes Lyon and the Honourable Albemarle Bowes Lyon.
And then directly behind them, as we watch them go under the arch there, her senior staff, the equerry, Captain Mark Grayson, who would have played in the role of this this monarch a very large role.
Very much so, and any of our viewers who may have written to the Queen Mother to offer her their congratulations on her 100th birthday, for example, would have received a reply most likely from Sir Alistair Aird, her private secretary, who is also much in the procession today. And of course, leading the royal household is Right Honourable the Earl of Crawford and Balcarres, who is the Lord Chamberlain to, was the Lord Chamberlain, I should say, to the Queen Mother.
Looking down Whitehall, there, probably the single most historic street in London. That is where the Prime Minister's office is, the Cabinet Office, where various wars have been waged from, the Treasury, and we don't see it here, but not very far from here, the House of Commons.
Yes, and passing, I think that's the Foreign Office, and this too is where, right now, they're very close to the banqueting hall, the last part of Westminster Palace, Whitehall Palace, sorry, where King Charles I was executed.
Downing Street is just off to the left here. The 10 Downing Street, of course, the official residence of the Prime Minister, Tony Blair.
And here is the cenotaph, where for nearly 80 years the Queen Mother came year in, year out to lay a wreath on Remembrance Sunday. Now it is our turn to pay our respects and to remember.
You see the personal standard of the Queen Mother there. That, of course, was flown on Parliament Hill to commemorate her 100th birthday. It was a gesture of the Government of Canada, and so many Canadians would have seen that standard flying in Ottawa.
The crown, as we said a little bit earlier, not worn by the Queen since the coronation of her daughter, Queen Elizabeth, in 1953. The only crown jewel, I understand, and the only crown that is made of platinum, so it is particularly heavy.
To give some idea of the impact and the length of the reign of the Queen Mother, it's interesting to look at those regiments who are marching and how many of them were connected with the Queen Mother. We have four, aside from Britain, four other Commonwealth nations have regiments marching here. South Africa, New Zealand and Australia, along with Canada, all have a deep connection with the Queen Mother.
The procession approaching Westminster Hall, considered the cradle of Parliament.
It's a medieval building. It's played a central role in British history for something like 900 years, and of course it's the same location where King George VI lay in state, as well as Winston Churchill. So the history is not lost, I'm sure, on many people in London. The significance of that building and its ancient history.
Yes, but Westminster Hall goes back to 1097 when William Rufus, the son of William the Conqueror, constructed it, and it was the largest building in Europe at the time, site of some of the greatest events in British history, the trial of the gunpowder plot conspirators, Guy Fawkes, of Thomas More, of King Charles I, where he was condemned to be executed, coronation banquets, and of course state funerals ever since that of Edward VII and Gladstone.
The first building, I gather, also in 1265, to house a parliament that represented commoners in it as well. It was sort of a pivotal point of the conflict of the time between the legislature and a very powerful sovereign.
That's right, the famous Simon de Montfort Parliament, which was the first to have commoners, not just barons. And here we can see just the thousands of people who have gathered to pay their respects, just showing the degree to which the Queen Mother really did reach out to people. Today we think of the people's princess, but we fail to remember that the term was coined before that of the people's queen. And there we see the people's queen passing by her people.
We were struck too by the numbers of young people who were lining up to pay respect at St. James Palace when her coffin was there. And there you go, in loving memory. Lilibeth, it looks like.
These are members of the Royal British Legion with their colours lowered.
That was, and please correct me if I'm not right here, but Lilibeth was Queen Elizabeth's pet name for her daughter, wasn't it?
That's right, Lilibet, ever since she was a child.
See the sidewalks of Whitehall packed to capacity.
See to the right, Sir Winston Churchill, the last person to receive such a magnificent funeral and procession. Not since '65 have Britons, or indeed anyone in the Commonwealth, seen something of this magnitude.
Quite extraordinary, of course, because these state funerals are usually reserved for sovereigns, but it was a measure of Britain's thanks to Winston Churchill for his role as a war leader that the decision was made to give him a state funeral as well.
Indeed, and the sovereign never attends state funerals usually, and the Queen broke the tradition and did attend that funeral.
It's interesting.
Many of our viewers will also.
Go ahead, John. Sorry.
I think many of our viewers will also remember, of course, the funeral of John F. Kennedy in the United States, and that procession, which is evoked by the gun carriage here. We recall heads of states from numerous countries attended that service, and so there are some similarities with ceremonial we've seen in the United States as well.
I'm struck by how often this procession, as it weaves its way through the streets of London, parallels the farewell to King George VI. That was in 1952. It was almost 50 years ago. But is it simply tradition, do you think, Raphael, that the Queen Mother has requested so many of her own procession to pass by points that were important to both of them? Or do you think, and who can say perhaps, but the House of Commons, you see there, Big Ben on the left, or do you think that it is a sign of the lingering attachment that she had for her husband?
It's difficult to say. The route is a traditional route which is usually taken, but there was a diversion through Horse Guards Road, and one wonders whether that was to pass by the statue of King George VI.
Which we saw.
Their love was really that their love really does span the generations, and she, I'm sure, is to her dying days remained as deeply in love as she was before. We celebrate the Queen Mother's, the Queen's Golden Jubilee this year, but we must also remember that this was also the Golden Jubilee of the Queen Mother as Queen Mother. For 50 years she had been a widow, and it is rather sadly ironic that Her Majesty the Queen Mother should die 50 years also after her husband.
It's remarkable, though, other than what we've talked about, which is the stuff of history books and public record, how little we knew about her. She gave her one and only interview, I gather, in 1923 when she was engaged to the then Prince Albert, who became King George VI. And that was the last interview she gave in 1923. Was she a family woman? What do you know about her as a person other than what is known in the history books and the research?
Well, I think that she was burned by that interview she gave. She was reprimanded for it at the time by the then king, and she didn't repeat that mistake. And I think, very much to her credit, I think that there's not a lot has been served by press interviews by members of the family. Remember the Princess of Wales and Prince Charles and the controversy that associated their decisions to sit down and consent to interviews. Really, the Queen Mother spoke to people when she met people, and she spoke with her eyes, and she spoke at numerous occasions throughout her long life. And I'm not sure what would have been served by having sort of in-depth tell-all style interviews.
Which she probably never would have done regardless of that. Let's watch for a moment. The procession has arrived at Westminster Hall. The Queen.
Here the coffin is borne aloft again by 8 members of the Irish Guards. The Archbishop of Canterbury leading the procession into Westminster Hall. The Dean of Westminster as well, the Lord Great Chamberlain, the Marquis of Cholmondeley, Lord Chancellor, the Speaker of the House of Commons, led by Blackrod, Lieutenant General Sir Michael Wilcox. There we have Westminster Hall with that fine hammer beam roof put in place by King Richard II. And just think, when the Queen Mother was born, that room was 800 years old. Now it's 900 years old.
Members of Parliament on one side of the hall.
Yeah, we saw Tony Blair and Ian Duncan Smith, leader of the Conservative Party.
And on the opposite side of the hall, members of the House of Lords.
And now the coffin approaches the catafalque, the ceremonial funeral platform, draped in purple velvet, garnet felt, and decorated with gold braid. And once the coffin is placed on that catafalque, the lying in state of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, will commence. Lady Thatcher,
which I believe is her first public appearance since suffering several mild strokes. And so the official lying in state period begins.
For the next 3 days, the Queen Mother will rest where her beloved Bertie rested. And the nation can come and pay their respects to a woman whose like we will never see again. Born a Victorian and raised an Edwardian. A person who spanned the century and in many ways epitomized all that was truly noble in the human spirit.
She is the last great figure of the Second World War to pass as well. Churchill, so many other great leaders, and you know, for those of our viewers who don't believe she was that pivotal, it was Hitler who said that she was perhaps the most dangerous woman in Britain for her ability to rouse the spirits. Let's listen to the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Let us pray. O Lord, our Heavenly Father, Almighty and everlasting God, we remember before Thee our sister, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. We give thanks for her example of faithful duty and unwearied service, and for the loyalty and love which she inspired. Hear, Lord, the prayers of Thy people, and grant that we who confess Thy name on earth with her may be made perfect in the kingdom of Thy Son, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Father of all mercies and giver of all comfort, deal graciously, we pray, with those who mourn, that casting all their care on Thee, they may know the consolation of Thy love, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Dr. George Carey, the Archbishop of Canterbury,
the 103rd Archbishop of Canterbury, and indeed the first not to have attended either Oxford or Cambridge, another sign of the changing times that we have seen over the course of the Queen Mother's reign and life.
Of course, the Queen herself is the head of the Church of England.
The funeral will take place at Westminster Abbey, which is a royal peculiar, a unique status only occupied by St. George's Chapel, Windsor. It is the Dean is directly under the Sovereign, and there is no Bishop or Archbishop of Canterbury in between the Dean and the Sovereign.
Of course, Westminster Abbey, where the coronation of the Queen Mother and the Queen Elizabeth at the time, of course, and King George VI. So another point of connection with her life.
And soon the vigil will start, and later on the last day of the lying in state, the Queen Mother's 4 grandsons, the Duke of York, the Earl of Wessex, the Prince of Wales, and Viscount Linley, will stand in vigil by themselves.
Go in the peace of Christ. Amen.
There is some precedence for that vigil, but it has not been done for, I think, well, at least in the past century.
Well, no, not since 1936. George V's 4 children, sons. And here we see I believe this is the household cavalry.
The public will be able to view this scene in about 2 hours' time. We're told the lines began forming about 5 o'clock this morning in Britain, and that was it is now currently 12 in London. And so those lines are going to be long. They will continue through the weekend until Tuesday, until late Monday actually, and then the funeral in Westminster Abbey on the Tuesday.
And the first vigil commences. And to the right, the Lord Great Chamberlain and Lord Chancellor pass off. And all is now silent as people are left with their thoughts and memories, reflections and recollections of happy events, happy times, dark times.
The magnificent Gothic architecture. This is quite a large room. It was once the largest room in all of Europe.
And it's over 300 feet in length and almost 100 feet in height.
Senior members of the royal family leaving the hall. The Queen and the Duke.
Canadians will, of course, have an opportunity to see the Queen this October when she makes a royal visit to Canada in her Jubilee year. It's certainly not been off to a very good start for Her Majesty. The death of her sister and now her mother. But she's proceeding with all of the commitments, the Jubilee commitments she had undertaken this year.
But in a sad way, the death has just demonstrated the depth of affection that exists for the monarchy, for the Queen Mother, this woman who really did create the modern monarchy in every sense. Her impact will be felt long after this day has passed.
And as we watch the Prince of Wales and his brothers enter their limousines, we're going to cut away for just a moment to a piece Linda Boyle from Global National has put together for us on the kind of week this has been for the royal family, the way that they have displayed their affection for the Queen Mother, and also in many ways led their country in mourning her loss.
Even though she was 101, the news seemed to come as a shock to her family. Prince Charles and his 2 sons were away skiing when it happened. These British citizens were among the first to pay tribute to an extraordinary life. Soon after news of her death, they brought cards and flowers to Windsor Castle, where she spent her final hours. Prime Minister Tony Blair spoke for the country.
For us, for the British people, she was our Queen Mother. She was someone we were immensely proud of. She was a dominant, unifying figure in our country's history for the best part of a century.
On Sunday, the Queen Mother's coffin was moved to Windsor's small stone chapel. The next day at noon, the deafening sound of cannons echoed across Britain. 41 gun salutes were fired simultaneously in 10 locations across the country. It was the first time a royal death had been marked this way since the passing of the Queen Mother's husband, George VI, 50 years ago. Prince Charles spoke of his loss.
And for me, she meant everything. And I had dreaded this moment, along with, I know, countless others. Somehow, I never thought it would come. She seemed gloriously unstoppable. And ever since I was a child, I adored her. Her houses were always filled with an atmosphere of fun, laughter, and affection. And I learned so much from her of immense value in my life.
Canadians had a chance to express their thoughts too in books of condolence.
Well, I believe we've lost an icon of tradition in both the Commonwealth and Canadian society. I think that her, more than anyone else, managed to tie Canada to the monarchy in times when many Canadians are beginning to question the monarchy.
What we'll all remember is the example that she was of courage, of dedication, of commitment to public service.
On Tuesday, her coffin made the 75-minute journey to St. James Palace in London, and thousands lined the route.
Order! Order! I invite the House to rise and observe a minute's silence in memory of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother.
And British Parliament was called back from a holiday break for this moment of silence.
I beg to move that an humble address be presented to Her Majesty, expressing the deep sympathies and condolences of this House.
Prince Andrew announced that he and his brothers, Charles and Edward, along with their cousin Lord Linley, would hold a vigil by the Queen Mother's coffin.
We each had an individual and unique relationship with our grandmother. She was very, very, very special.
And yesterday, the Queen spoke to well-wishers for the first time since her mother's death, saying that her mother had enjoyed a wonderful life.
Back live in London now, as you see the Queen pass by the crowds that have gathered outside of Buckingham Palace. Phil, I'm wondering, we heard in that piece that Linda just did, people talking about the grounding of the monarchy, how she, as long as she was alive, the monarchy had such a strong symbol of stability in her life. I'm wondering whether you worry now at her passing, whether that stability is shaken.
No, obviously at the current time there is a gaping void in the royal family which the Queen Mother once occupied, and it'll never be filled. What we will have, though, is a new generation of royals coming up and in their own way changing the monarchy, making the monarchy evolve as it always has, and the monarchy will continue. It's survived 1,000 years, and institutions don't just fade away. The Queen Mother's impact on the royal family will be felt. She has modernized it over the years, and I certainly have the utmost faith in the new generation.
Looking at members of the British Parliament here, and on the right actually members of the House of Lords, including Lady Thatcher. As you know, or well know, in Britain there's always a bit of creative tension between the House of Commons in particular and the royal family on issues of finances, but I guess a follow-up question to my first one, Raphael, and that's if, with the passing of the Queen Mother and the obvious enormous respect that people had for her, is there any concern that the relations between the royal family and the House of Commons, which after all has to okay most of the bills, might enter a new phase as well?
No, I really don't see any connection there whatsoever, and I haven't heard that being put forward by anybody at all. To the left we see St. Margaret's, a small church in the shadow of that mighty edifice of Westminster Abbey, which is where Churchill and Pepys and Milton were married, not to each other, but at different points in history.
We should mention that Tuesday morning I will be in front of the Abbey there for the funeral of the Queen Mother, which at this point looks like it will be take about an hour. And you can be sure that the groups of people that you already see lining up, I think you can see in the bottom left-hand of your corner there, that they will be waiting outside listening to the loudspeakers proclaim the final rites of the Queen Mother. That's Tuesday morning. Begins about 6 o'clock in that's Toronto time, about 4 o'clock Mountain and 3 o'clock Pacific.
And just 5 years ago, the Queen Mother was at Westminster Abbey for the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales. She was last at the Abbey, I believe, last year for a remembrance service.
All right, joined now John Geiger and Raphael Hadel-Menku, who have been helping me tremendously and hopefully helping you as well understand what you've been seeing this morning on the streets of London. It has been a morning of deep tradition and also a reminder of the deep history and the attachment to the British Crown as well. John, as you watch this go by today, it's interesting. The royal family, in some ways, people who remember the pivotal role that the Queen Mother played in the Second World War have obviously a very strong attachment to her and developed that and held that through their lives. But people of our generation perhaps have a different view of her, and it's probably a little more benevolent. Many of us probably didn't even know that she was such a symbol of strength in the Second World War. What do you think young people take out of this today? And by young people, I mean people in their 20s and 30s who, who may think that the monarchy doesn't really play a role in our daily lives anymore. Are we reminded of things on a day like this?
Well, obviously it has a tremendous effect on people, and I think that as you witness these sorts of events, you learn from them, and you understand that these are institutions that have lasted for centuries. This is an institution that has served Canada throughout its history. The special bond that Canadians have with the Queen Mother, I think, has been demonstrated in many ways this last few days, and so I think that I think looking at the people we have here today and our ages, there are new generations of Canadians who understand the value of the monarchy and understand the importance of tradition and our history. And the evolution of our institutions of government, and so I think that this sort of event, sad though it is, plays a very important sort of educational role for young Canadians.
When so many people are listening and learning, Raphael, what does it mean to the Monarchist League of Canada? Do you, after events such as these, whether they're royal weddings, whether the passing of the royal family, do things happen with the Monarchist League? Is there any sort of renewed interest, and does that inevitably wane over time again?
What we find, actually, it's very interesting, whenever there is an event, sad as this one is, but an event involving the royal family in some dramatic way, there is an outpouring of support, and new memberships flood in. Our webpage, has many more hits, and there then tends to be across the nation those silent monarchists, people who don't wear badges on their shoulders or on their sleeves saying I am a monarchist, but people who do have a deep and abiding affection for the institutions of this country. The monarchy has been with us since the very beginning. Our links go back to King Francis I of France. We have a dual heritage in our monarchical tradition, and we've known nothing else, and Canadians respect that, and they appreciate the continuity that it places in this nation, and the distinguishing factor between us and other nations. And so it's at moments like these that people do sit down and reevaluate and reflect on the importance of that institution.
You mentioned, one of the distinguishing characteristics of Canada, especially at a time when, so many people argue that we're moving closer and closer to the United States. I want to show some pictures from this morning, people lining up in Britain. These, if you ever wondered whether or not the monarchy is there for the people of Great Britain, you can, I think we have some pictures of what it looked like this morning as people lined up, beginning, as I said, about 5 o'clock in the morning. Oh, I'm sorry, these are photographs of these are pictures of the procession, the grand procession as it began a couple of moments ago. And this was the first time that London had seen this particular ceremony since the passing of King George VI, and they had experienced, as you've heard this morning, the state funeral of Sir Winston Churchill in 1965, but this was the first royal funeral to show this degree of pomp and circumstance and tradition as well. I'm not sure if we have the pictures of the people lining up and gathering early this morning, but if we do.
And there we see a very dignified population mourning in a very restrained way, entirely fitting in keeping with the Queen Mother's dignified manner. I recall seeing the Queen Mother in 1995. I was in London for the 50th anniversary of VE Day, and I remember standing in the mile through which the Queen Mother has just passed a few minutes ago, with hundreds of thousands of other people waiting to see the Queen Mother, and the doors to the balcony opened, and the lone figure of the Queen Mother walked out and stood where she had stood 50 years earlier, all alone on this occasion. And she had hundreds of thousands of people in the palm of her hand. The charisma, whether one was being granted a private audience or whether one was a single figure amongst thousands, she had the same ability to charm and to captivate. And that is something which I think we will dearly miss.
Well, the echo of that historical moment too, because of course she shared that platform with the rest of the royal family and Winston Churchill at the end of the Second World War, and it was just such a marvelous thing. The royal family, I don't know, you probably do know whether or not the royal family had ever shared that particular balcony with a commoner in that way up until that moment, and to see her come out 50 years later on that same balcony and acknowledge the cheers of the veterans and the people of London. I mean, it must have just sent a chill up the spine of everybody there.
And I think it showed to a new generation that although we think of the Queen Mother as our favorite grandmother or great-grandmother swathed in blue or pink chiffon, she was very much the iron fist in the velvet glove, and that iron will and resolute spirit served as a symbol of defiance against Nazi aggression. And indeed, only Winston Churchill was her equal at that time for mobilizing a nation, for standing up to tyranny. And when we look at that balcony, we can remember that there were other people in Europe in the 30s who stood on balconies, the Hitlers and the Mussolinis and Stalins of this world. And the crowds that were forced to cheer didn't cheer out of free will. They cheered because there was a Gestapo around the corner compelling them to adore. But the adoration that we have for the monarchy, for the royal family, for the Queen Mother, comes from free will and from love. We cheer the royal family because we want to.
All right, Rafael, some tremendous final words, and we appreciate your help this morning in walking us through this, and also John Geiger from the National Post, your comments and context as well. Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Greatly. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And we're now going to return to regular programming across the Global Network. A reminder, a full wrap-up of this on Global National tonight in our live coverage Tuesday morning of the Queen Mother's funeral. I'm Kevin Newman.
This has been a special report from Global National.